Go ahead.
Hey guys, it's Ted from American Rifle. We're here at a range in Ravensdale, or I think it's Ravensdale, Washington, with our friend Eric. John's on the camera, and I was just going to show Eric how we disassemble the bolt. So, and then John's like, "Hey, let's get a video of this." So, well, that's what we're doing. But anyway, there's a bolt shroud locking pin there. Prevents bolt shroud rotation when the bolt's when the bolt's not in the gun or retracted. So you push back on that, give this a little turn, it pops out. Then floating bolt head with a bolt head pin similar to the Archimedes and the basically like all of our actions, right? The striker, you can completely disassemble the striker with this bolt. You just put this back in without the bolt head. Make sure it locks back in here. And then you use the bolt shroud locking pin as a tool, right? I'm basically going to take the tip of the firing pin, put it on the bolt. I called that the bolt shroud locking pin. It's the bolt head pin. You're going to take the tip of the firing pin and put it in the there's a hole in the bolt head pin, and put it in there. Push down, lift. So I hope I did it faster than I could say it, but basically, you push down, expose the cocking piece, rotate the cocking piece 90 degrees, and pull it off the pin, and then your striker comes apart that way. Then you can take this guy apart again. Bolt handle just pops out of it. This spring and this bushing, they just bias the bolt handle to the forward position so it doesn't flop around. And then as far as, there's a couple other little pieces. There's your bolt shroud locking pin that you can disassemble by you use the tip of your firing pin to just push it down slightly and rotate it. And there's a little tab, there's a tiny little tab that comes off of the bolt shroud locking pin that engages basically a longitudinal slot in the bolt shroud, and that's used to retain that little assembly. And then as far as the extractor here inside the bolt head, this assembly consists of the bolt head, the extractor, a little ball that's pushing on the extractor, and the spring pushing on the ball. So to get those out, take the tip of your firing pin, stick it down in that enlarged hole, and just pry the end of the spring out of the slot, and then you can pull the spring out and the little ball will follow it. Careful not to lose the ball, and then it all just comes apart. That's every part. And theoretically you could run this thing without this piece, without that piece, and without those two. So there's, I think, a total of 16 parts here, and I think you can actually run it with 12. So the reassembly, so we're just going to do what we just did, but in reverse, right? So just drop the extractor in, I drop the little ball in the hole, let it roll forward towards the extractor, and I just stick the pin in, or the spring in. I think sometimes I can do this with my fingernails, like just now I did it. And if it's kind of sticking up a little bit, just push it down with the fat end of the firing pin. Make sure it's nicely in that slot. It looks okay there. And then I'll put your bolt shroud back together. So I put the little pin in the hole in the back of or take the spring and put it in the hole in the back of the bolt shroud locking pin. It's hard to talk out here because it's cold. But then all I'm doing there is just pushing it in, rotating it until it finds one slot, and then you'll see it'll just pop up a little bit. Once it's in there, we're good to go. And then take this guy, spring goes in there, bushing. There's a slopey part of the bushing that'll face the side of the bolt that has the entrance to the bolt handle, and you'll see it when you actually get it in your hands. It's pretty easy to do, and you'll see it all it takes. Just like that, it pops together. And now I can put the bolt shroud back in here, because I'm going to use the bolt as a tool to reassemble, to compress the striker spring, right? So that guy goes back down. When you put the bolt shroud back in the bolt assembly, to use the bolt assembly as a tool to compress the striker spring, you want to make sure the bolt shroud locking pin engages the little notch in the back of the bolt, because you're not going to want the bolt shroud to rotate when you do this next step, which consists of putting the bolt head pin down. There's just so you know, let's do this before we get there. Show you how this goes together. Kind of goes together like a Mauser, right? You know, basically stick the end of the firing pin into the cocking piece and rotate 90 degrees. So that's what you're doing when you take this on and off. So to put that together, you should also know that there's flats, right? Because it can come apart like this, just like a Mauser. There's flats cut into the striker. Or striker, I call it striker and the firing pin interchangeably. So if this is a striker or a firing pin, you can call it whatever you want. But you're going to have to remember how these flats are oriented so you can get this thing back together. So it's not hard to do. You just have to be aware of it. So what you're going to do, hold the firing pin by the tip, stick the point into the hole in the bolt head pin. And incidentally, the reason you're doing that is because when you put this thing in, it has to come out quite a ways, right? And then the tip is inside, and like if I were just to push it down on the table, it wouldn't come up high enough, right? It wouldn't, the back of the striker wouldn't come up high enough to get the cocking piece on. So I have to put it on something, which is why we put that little hole in the bolt head. So I take this now and I'm going to stick that in there, and I'm going to remember how the flats are oriented. And I'm going to drop this guy, the spring on top of it, and I'm going to make sure, because I know how the flats are oriented, I'm going to make sure that the slot in the bottom of the what's this thing called, the bolt shroud, is facing me, and that should just pass. They should just line up just like they did. Put that down there. So now that the striker assembly's back together, I need to pop it right back out to put the bolt head into the bolt, and it's going to be ejector slot and lined up with a bolt stop slot, or you can think of it as extractor on the bolt handle side, right? Because you can put it in like this or like this, right? But it needs to be like this. And then put that guy in. It's not bad with cold fingers. And then there's an index mark. There's an index mark on the bolt head pin that lets you know you have it oriented correctly, so as to allow the passage of the striker assembly into it, and that's it. That's completely reassembled bolt. And that guy, you can just, here we are just making a mess on the, just right back in the receiver, and that's that.